Have you ever knit a toe-up sock with cables and lace and a sole gusset and a heel flap? My name is Jeanette and I am the designer behind Jeanette Knits, and welcome to another in-depth tutorial on how to create these Lyon Memories Socks. It is a toe-up construction and it features a cable and lace panel here at the top of the foot, and a reinforced slip stitch pattern all across the sole and here at the back of the leg, as well as a sole gusset, Japanese short row shaped heel, and a heel flap. The sock is packed with all sorts of interesting techniques, and in this video I'll walk you through step by step every section of the sock and all the required techniques quite close up. If you'd like to knit along with me, you'll need some sock yarn, needles for that sock yarn, and the pattern for the Lyon Memories Socks, which you can find on Ravelry or our website, searching for Lyon, the city in France, Memories Socks, or alternatively follow the link in the description below. I'm assuming that you already know how to make a gauge swatch and how to adjust the needle size to get the required gauge in the pattern, which is 32 stitches times 38 rows in a 10 by 10 or centimeters or 4 by 4 inches in a stockinette stitch worked in the round, of course. And in this tutorial we'll cover the closed cast on, the increases, lifted increases required for the toe. I'll demo some quick tips on how to do the cabling without cable needle and some additional alternative ways to work some of the lace stitches, how to work the gusset, and most importantly, how to work the short row shaped heel here and the heel flap. And finally, we'll finish setting up the cuff so it aligns perfectly, and add the stretchy tubular bind-off. I've included chapters down in the description, so feel free to skip sections if you see that I'm covering something that you already know, as this is a rather long video. So let's get started. As this is a toe-up sock, we'll need a cast on. That's a closed cast on. It means we can cast on stitches and knit in both the directions in the round. And there are a few options. My favorite happens to be the Judy Magic cast on, which I also describe in the pattern, but you of course can substitute with a Turkish cast on or whatever your preferred method for that is. I'll demo the one that's described in the pattern, and for that you'll need a set of circular needles with quite a long cable and yarn, and you place the needles next to each other like so, and you leave some tail for the yarn, and basically you'll have to hold it as you would for the long tail cast on, and we have to cast on 12 stitches on each needle. That is 24 in total. Some people like to start with a little slip knot. That's a bit more stable, and if you're a beginner at this, then maybe that's a good idea, so to make the first loop a slip knot. But you can also omit the slip knot and just place the yarn through these two needles without that knot. And then there is a mantra we should remember. Now I have a one loop on the top needle and I need to get a loop on the bottom needle, so I have to move the opposite finger around the bottom and over the top through the middle of the two needles. And now I need a loop on the top needle, so I'll move the opposite finger around the bottom and over the top through the middle. Again, opposite finger around the bottom through the top, and I've got two loops on each needle, and I need to repeat that 10 times. So one at the top, one at the bottom, one at the top, one at the bottom. You always have to pull the yarn, both tails quite snug so they stay in place, otherwise it can get very unstable and slippery, but you can get quite quick. So yeah, the last loop that I did was on the bottom needle, so I need a loop on the top easy to remember. Opposite finger around the bottom, through the middle, around the bottom, through the middle. And so I'll just need a few more to get to my 12. And now I've lost the count. 1, 2, 9. So 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. It's a bit fiddly, but after a few practice rounds, it can get really straightforward and actually is as easy as it looks. So once you've done all the loops, it's very flimsy here, so we have to twist the 2 strands so we don't lose any loop. Maybe 1 twist would work. I like to do 2 twists because I want to make sure I continue with the strand that's attached to the yarn ball. Otherwise you won't get very far with this one, and that will be the working yarn, and I will be working across the stitches on what now is the bottom needle. So I'll turn it around, that becomes in the direction that I can work across these stitches. And the reason why you need circular needles for this is so that you can pull out the bottom needle, leaving these stitches on the cable. So that's a lot more flexible. And the reason why you need a long cable is so that you could do this figure of 8 and your needle still moves freely. But yeah, try not to let go of these strands. As soon as you let go, all of the rest will become loose. So let's move quickly and just knit across these 12 stitches. Whether you knit continental, whether you knit continental or English, doesn't matter. Knitting is knitting. We just need to get the yarn through the existing loop on the needle. Whichever way you do is fine. So here we simply knit through the front loop as the most basic knit stitch. Whoopsies. Okay, now I've done the first needle. I need to do the same on the second needle. So I'll get all of those stitches back on the actual needle by pulling the cable, turn it upside down like that so that I can work across, and again pull the bottom needle out so that I get the bottom needle stitches on a cable. But here is a little different. Now first we have that slip knot. If you did that, it will be a little tricky to work that, but it's possible. We knit through it and slip, and now you can see that all the stitches on this needle are actually mounted the other way, with the first leg being the back leg. So we have to knit through these stitches through the back loop, otherwise they will appear twisted, and it's actually a lot harder to knit them through the front loop here because they are mounted the other way. So intuitively you should be able to see that these ones require knitting through the back loop. That's just the way the Judy Magic cast on mounts the stitches. I think there is a way to get them to mount correctly. It requires a little bit more thinking, but it's just simpler to do this, and it's not a big deal to knit 12 stitches through the back loop. And voila, we can now work in the round. It could be a good idea to place a beginning of round marker here. Let me get my needles back in the right position to continue working. We'll have to do a bit of sliding of these stitches after every needle. But yeah, I won't put a marker in yet because I can see my tail is still hanging on this side, and it will always stay on this side, so I'll know that that's my beginning of round. And I'll add my beginning of round marker when I have finished my toe so that no markers get in the way here. I'll be continuing to work on these circular needles until I have finished all the toe increases, and then I'll move to DPNs. So I'm going to be making a very symmetrical trapezoid shaped toe. which means that on the top and bottom needle I'll repeat exactly the same instructions, and which will be making a couple of increases on either side of the needle, so one stitch away from here and one stitch away from the end. And you can use whichever increase method you prefer. We just need to make one knit increase on both sides, as long as they are the opposite leaning direction. So the first one should be leaning right and the second one should be leaning left, so you can use make one right and make one left instead. I prefer to an increase called a lifted increase, which I also describe in the pattern. I'll knit the first stitch, and now here comes the spot where I need to do the increase. And for a right leaning lifted increase, theoretically we need to pick up the stitch from the row below, place it on the needle so that it doesn't overlap the stitch next to it, because if I just dropped it on there, it would be very hard to knit through it because it kind of merges with the existing stitch. So I'm using my thumb to hold the stitch back here, and then simply knit through, and that has now created a new stitch, and I can continue knitting. You will find that it might be even easier if you simply insert your working needle, your active needle, through the loop like so, and simply knit through it without having to put it on the needle. Then it doesn't mix with the other stitches. So again, I just come here, I pick up the loop like so and knit through it, and I've got my new stitch, and I can continue working all the way to one stitch before the end of this needle, at which point I need to create a left leaning increase. And because this is now from a stitch on the other side, from the side that where all the worked stitches already go, I don't just need to take a strand one below, but two below. Well, it's also not possible to take the strand one below. It's kind of the same strand that you're working with. So inserting the needle from back to front like so, and knitting through the back loop, and that will create a new stitch that is left leaning. Knit the last stitch, and that is my increase, half of the increase round done. I need to repeat exactly the same on the other needle, and then I'll return back to the beginning of round, at which point I need to just do one plain round without increases. And so I'll be alternating between an increase round, increasing 4 stitches in the round 2 on each needle, and a plain round until I have reached the full foot circumference and all the necessary stitches. I've finished all the toe increases, and now I'm going to start properly working in the round. So the instructions are now from this point assuming working in the round instead of needle 1 and needle 2. So I am ready to finally place the marker, but here for this particular project we need to move the beginning of round from here on the side to align with the bottom of the foot, because then we get a really symmetric situation where the lace and cable panel will sit at the top of the foot, and it will be reversely mirrored from the center of the foot. So there is one special round after the toe increases where we have to move the beginning of round all the way to here. So we'll just work until there, place a marker, and then that will be the new beginning of round. And I will use this round to move to DPNs. Normally I would use wooden DPNs because they're lighter and they are the gravity isn't working against me, and they stay in the project. But because this sock contains some cabling, and I do cabling without cable needle and some lace decreases, it will be easier and more stressless or less stressful to work on with metallic needles. So I will knit 16 stitches to place them on the first DPN. One, two, three, four. I should be in the middle of the top of the foot now. The rest of needle 1 stitches will sit on the second DPN. And 1 more until I reach the new beginning of round marker. Voila, I am at the, just double checking that I have got the counts right. I am at the new beginning of round, and I will place a little marker to note that there. Again, because I'm using DPNs, I can't really place a marker at the end of this needle. It will keep sliding off, but if you are using circular needles, then you could place this marker on the needles and slip it as you work each round. Next we set up the Instep and we'll place markers because all sizes, the sock comes in 3 sizes, are using the same lace chart. We have to find where to begin that chart for each size, and for size 2 that I'm working, it is 18 stitches away from the beginning of round. For your size, it will be specified in the pattern. So that means a whole needle here. And 2 more stitches for me. And this is where I will start following the chart. And at the start, we do 4 rounds following a separate chart called a setup chart, because in the first few rows we'll have to do some increases that are part of the chart. They're indicated there as part of the cabled stitches, because whenever there's cabling, the gauge tends to shrink a little bit. So if we had already cast on enough stitches to fit the lace and cable panel, we'd get some bulging here. There would be just too much fabric. So we start with less and we increase in the first, we'll increase in the first and third row of the chart. And that's why at the start we follow a setup chart, but once we have enough stitches, we'll switch to the main chart, and the chart will be worked between the 2 markers that we also place in this round. According to the chart, I have to purl 1, knit 4, purl 1, knit 3, because the 4th stitch doesn't exist yet. And then I have to do a special kind of cable that will take 3 stitches but result in 4 stitches, and that's a right leaning 2x1 increase cable. So I need to make these 2 stitches lean over this one, and I will do that by simply inserting my needle through the 2nd and 3rd stitch, slipping off the first one, and then picking it back up from behind and transferring these slipped stitches back on my passive needle, and then I can knit 2, yarn over, knit 1. So I have ended up with 4 stitches where I had 3. I can do the rest of the chart. Purl 1 and knit through the back loop, and now I'm going to do mirror of that. So again, knit through the back loop, purl 1, and this time I have to have the cable leaning in the other direction, so it's going to be a left leaning 2x1 increase cable. And to get these stitches leaning over the third one, I have to insert needle in the third one purlwise but behind work, slip the first 2 off, carefully slip them back on, and then place that third stitch there in front, and I will knit through it, do a yarn over to get that 4th stitch there, and then knit the 2 first stitches, and I have got 4 stitches instead of 3, and I knit 3, purl 1, knit 4, purl 1, and I should be 18 stitches to bore or beginning of round marker, and I place a new marker. And for the rest of the round I will be setting up the slipped stitch reinforced sole pattern, and we will start by slipping 1 and knitting 1, slipping 1 purlwise with the yarn in back, and we'll repeat that to the end of round. So slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1. Oh, and now we have ended our round. Funnily enough, we didn't start it with that, and there's a good reason for that, because we'll start the next round with the same pattern that we did here, but we will not start with the slip. To get it symmetrical, we'll start with the knit. So here at the center of the sole, we'll always have 2 knit stitches next to each other, but the rest will be a slip 1, knit 1 pattern. And that is to just get a symmetrical look on the top of the foot, where to make sure that the same type of stitch is enclosing the lace chart repeat. So here I go. Oops, I lost my marker. I end with a slip stitch, and I can follow the chart again. And it just so happens that every even row of the chart is pretty much working the stitch in pattern. You don't need to try and understand the chart so much. You just see what stitch you have on your needles and work it. So if it's a knit through the back loop, do that. If it's a purl, do that. No need to look at the chart that is on the even rows. And when we get to the end of the chart, to the slip stitch pattern, because we only need to slip a stitch on every other row, this now means that we just need to simply knit all the stitches to the beginning of round. And we are at the beginning of round, and we'll start the third round with knitting to the marker again. So with every round before the chart, you'll be working one way, so either knitting everything or slipping knitting, and after the chart you'll be doing the opposite. That is to ensure that here across the whole of sole we always do a seamless, it happens seamlessly, and that is quite important to stick to, because when we get to the gusset and the heel shaping, the pattern will assume that you will have kept to the instructions. And sometimes it can get tricky and you can get lost to try and follow the pattern. You have to make notes and check boxes a lot. Alternatively, what helped me was I said that slipping and knitting is a little bit harder than simply knitting, because there's a little bit of thinking involved. So I said whenever I start hard, so if I start the round on the hard bit, then as soon as I get to the chart part, it will be easy. I just need to follow what's on my needles all the way to the beginning of round. And then if I start it easy, then as soon as I get to the chart part, it's gonna be hard, because I'm gonna have to read the chart, and then I'm gonna have to do the thinking again here by slipping and knitting. So if you start hard, you end easy, and if you start easy, you end hard. That helped me a lot, and it was easy to figure out what I'm supposed to do, because I could see that, oh, on the previous round I have been slipping. I could see these little strands there very close to the needle, and then on the rows where I've just been knitting, those strands are a little bit further away from the needle, so I knew that it's time for me to now slip again. And that all there is to it. So once you have followed the setup chart and switch to main chart, so for main chart you just work all of the rows and then start from row 1 again until you reach the desired length of the sock to start the gusset. And the pattern has a measurement for your size. And before I get too far in, I just wanted to show you also how I do the actual cables. So I am on row 1 of the main chart, just before I am to do the 2x2 right leaning cable. And you can of course use a cable needle or another DPN, but I find it's a lot quicker and easier to just do them without one. So to get these 2 stitches, lean over the first 2, I have to insert the needle purlwise from the front, like so, into them, and carefully slide 4 off my passive needle, so my left hand needle in this case. And as I'm sliding them off, I try and bunch the fabric underneath it together, so there's no stretching of it whatsoever, and the stitches will stay in place. And I can just quickly use my pinky to pull out the needle tip just enough, and then everything stays in place. There's no stretching, I make sure of that, and I can put the needle tip back in there like that. Of course, I'm not adding this left hand needle back into these 2 stitches, because I need them to be free so that I can lean them over the front like so, and only then slip them back on the left hand needle to be worked. And I simply knit all 4, and voila, I have my 2x2 right leaning cable done. And what's next in the chart is a yarn over with a knit 2 together, and you'll probably find that it's quite tricky to get the needle inserted into the stitch that was for some reason it's very tight around the needle. It's something to do with the yarn over in the previous round. So a neat trick or workaround there is to simply knit the first one, then slide it back on the left hand needle, pass the second one over the first one, and then move them onto the right hand needle. And that has the same exact effect as I knit 2 together, except you don't need to find weird positions on how to insert the needle there. in the stitch that doesn't like to be worked that way. And I will also show you the SSK yarn over part in a second. So SSK, slip knitwise, slip knitwise, put them back on the left hand needle, and I don't even remove the right hand needle from there. I can simply get my strand of yarn and pull through, and I've got SSK done. I do a yarn over. Oops, that was a bit too early. I was supposed to knit 2 stitches first, knitting them through the back loop because I had already changed the orientation for the SSK, so ignore that. Right, here is where I'm doing the SSK now. Slip knitwise, put them back on the needle and knit through, yarn over. And now it's time for me to do the 2x2 left leaning cable. That means these 2 stitches should be leaning over these ones, and to get that I need to get the 3rd and 4th away. Again, I'm keeping the fabric around here really bunched up with using my thumbs and my other index finger while I pull carefully out the needle with my pinky and ring finger. And everything is bunched together. There's no stretching, no movement, so I can easily insert this needle back through the first 2 stitches. Bring the 3rd and 4th from behind, put them back on the needle, and I can knit all 4 that way. You can see that I'm using my thumb to keep these from leaning back in there and being in my way, so I'm exaggerating the cross over there. And voila, I have done the 2x2 left leaning cable as well. And there's a couple more little cables that will come in handy. So in row 5 of the main chart, we see for the first time a 1x1 left leaning cable, and that is also very easy to do without a cable needle. So left leaning means it leans from right to left. So this first stitch needs to be leaning over that one. That means I need to get the 2nd stitch from behind. Again, bunching up the fabric and just inserting that needle into this stitch, and then transferring the 2nd stitch before the first stitch so I can knit both of them like so. And I will have the symmetrically opposite, leaning in the opposite direction one right at the end of the chart. I just have to get there first. And now, because it is a right leaning, I need this stitch to lean over the first one. So I'll be grabbing it from the front. And again, carefully sliding both off and only inserting the needle through the first one to bring it back there. And knit both. I've got a 1x1 right leaning cable done. I've worked the sock to where I need to start the gusset, and the gusset is just extra stitches to increase the circumference here to accommodate for the higher arch around and the heel area, so it will improve the fit of the sock. And we simply need to add increases, and you can place them on the sides. I like to place them in the sole, and in this construction the increases will be coming out of this center line here that's formed by these 2 knit stitches next to each other. And because this area usually gets a lot more stretch than in the toe, we'll be using a slightly different increase that's a bit more tighter and might leave less holes. And that is a lifted twisted increase, so we will be twisting the stitch before knitting through. And similarly to how we did in the toe, we'll be increasing in one round and then doing one round without increases. So increase round, plain round, increase round, plain round. But because the sole is a 2-stitch repeat, the entire increase block will be a 4-round repeat. So the first round will be the increase round, and we will start with the start hard. We'll start with the start easy. So all of these to the chart should be knit. That's why the pattern says to start the gusset after finishing an even number of row of the main chart to make sure that the pattern aligns properly. So I will knit 1 stitch and I'll make my first increase, and this time is a twisted left leaning lifted increase, and that is I will pick up a stitch from the row below, but instead of knitting it through the back loop, which would leave a hole, I'll be knitting it through the front loop, therefore twisting it, and there's no hole. And I knit all the other stitches, and we'll get to the other side of the round to do the other increase. And this is the harder side because I am slipping every other stitch all the way to 2 stitches before beginning of round. Once I'm here, I do 1 more slip, and I will do a twisted right leaning lifted increase by twisting it, picking up the stitch this way and knitting through the back loop, that way ending up with a twisted increase and knitting the last stitch. So I now have 2 more stitches on either side, which kind of disturbs the pattern here, and now we have to begin hard by slipping, but because we have this extra stitch, we'll be knitting the first 2 this time, and this will then eventually become a knit column, and we'll increase 1 more here between them in the next round. That will become the slipped stitch column. So we knit 2 and slip, knit, slip, knit all the way around, and this will be all knit stitches here to there. And in the third round we'll do the exact same increase. We'll do the exact same increase steps as we did in the first one, but then on the 4th round, when we have a plain round without increases, we can return to work in the knit 1, slip 1 pattern, because we'll again have an even number of stitches to where the chart starts, and the same from the other side. And we repeat this 4-round section as many times as the pattern states for your size, and at that point we'll be ready to shape the heel. Now I've finished the gusset increases, and it's time to add some shaping to the heel before working the heel flap. This means that we'll be working short rows back and forth across this area. At the same time, we will continue to increase a few more stitches to get the required stitches for the heel flap. But instead of working the increases from the center line, we'll be working them at the end of each short row instead. And every turn will be a little closer to the center, so the increases will be equally spaced out along this line here as the short rows move closer to the center. I am using Japanese short row method, but you are welcome to use whichever method you like here, but the demo is with Japanese short rows. So for each size there are a different number of stitches you need to work before the first increase and turn. In my case, in size 2, it's 12 stitches. So I'll knit 12. Just make sure that I really did 12. Yes, and then I am to do the first increase, and I will be doing a right leaning increase here. Right leaning twisted increase. And for Japanese short row, I need to trap the yarn, secure it like that, and turn. Because it's a Japanese short row, I am slipping the first stitch. And because I am now on the row, that would require me to slip every other stitch. The next stitch also happens to be that column of slipped stitches, so I have to slip 2 stitches in a row, which is fine. And then I purl 1, and this time I have to slip with yarn in front because I'm working on the wrong side of the pattern. And so I continue slipping 1, purling, slipping 1, purling, all the way to beginning of row marker. I don't have the marker, it's all the way down there, but I know that because I'm working on DPNs, it's easy for me to know where the beginning of round is. And once I reach the beginning of round, I need to take a break in the pattern because remember there's 2 knit stitches on the right side here, so that means there's 2 consecutive purl stitches here. And I need to purl and slip 1 with yarn in front, equal distance from beginning of round before making an increase and a turn. So for me that would be 6 times. Purl, slip 1 with yarn in front, once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that will be the 6th. Let me just double check. Yes, and I am ready to do my right leaning twisted purl increase. So I am lifting up the leg onto the needle and purling through the front loop like so. And again, because I'm working Japanese short rows at the turn, I am using a bobby pin, but you can also use a locking stitch marker to trap the yarn and work back, knitting all stitches to 3 stitches before the previous turn. And that will, because we made an increase, that will work out as 2 stitches less than we worked previously. So let me just get to the beginning of round by slipping first one and then knitting the rest. And here, instead of 12 stitches, I'll be working just 10 because that will be 3 stitches before the previous turn as we made an increase. So 10 knit stitches. It will be a different number for your, but it's 3 stitches before the previous turn. I can simply, because I'm using Japanese short rows, I can easily identify where I turned, and that will be here, the last stitch that this trapped yarn touches. So 3 stitches before the turn is where I am now, and I am to make an increase again, and once more trap the yarn. and work all the way to 3 stitches before the turn on the wrong side. So that will be for me 10 stitches away from the beginning of round. And I'll be turning here again after an increase, and again remembering that I am now doing the slipping of every other stitch, starting with 2 slipped stitches, purl, slip, purl, and remembering the 2 consecutive purl stitches here. And the pattern says to repeat this 2 more times, so at the end I'll have 4 turns on each side, and I'll return back and show how we deal with these bobby pins. I have just finished the last short row. I've turned on the wrong side and come back to the beginning of round. And here is the round, which probably will be the trickiest one in the entire project, because at the same time we are going to be closing all these gaps or concealing all the turns and placing heel flap markers. So we have to be careful to count the required number of stitches to our heel flap marker as we work on these gaps. So because I'm using Japanese short rows, that's what I will be demoing. I have to knit 15 for my size for the first marker, and maybe it's a good idea to actually place that marker already on the needles. However, I would be a little bit cautious because I'm not entirely sure where I will, which stitches I'll have to use to close these gaps. So let's see how that goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here is my first turn that I need to conceal by pulling up this loop and placing it on the needle and knitting 2 together. That is my 8th stitch, 9th, 10th, and here is just the increased stitch. I know that I turned there as well, so I have to close another one. Knit 2 together as 11, 12, 13, and here is another 14 and 15. So I have my 15 stitches from the beginning of round for my first heel flap marker, and I am to knit all the way to the chart marker, but I have still one more turn to conceal, and I know that I gotta knit this one. That's the increased stitch, and I will be closing that turn here. So that was the tricky part, number 1. But the tricky part number 2 is still coming up, because closing these ones will be a whole different ball game, as we're not working on stockinette stitch, and we'll just so happen to be on the round. Here it was easy because we were knitting all stitches and we didn't have to do anything special to close the turns. But when we are on the other side of the chart, we'll be working the slip stitch pattern, so slipping every other one, and then we'll have to be a bit more mindful about how we close. So I'll just get there. Here I am on the other side of the chart, and we are in a little bit of a different situation because it is the round where we need to slip every second stitch. and that will make concealing these turns here a little bit trickier. So I'm supposed to slip one and knit one 9 times before slipping another one and placing a heel marker. But I suspect that just before that happens, I'll have to work out how to conceal this turn. So let me get there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 9th, but before I complete it, I need to use this knit stitch to conceal the turn here by slipping it knitwise, knitting through this loop and passing that slip stitch over. So these are my 9 slip knit pairs, and then I am to slip another one and place the heel flap marker. And now I am to knit and slip all the way to the beginning of round while concealing the remaining turns. So I have to start with a knit, and the next turn coincides with to conceal the next turn. I would have to do that with a stitch that I'm having to slip, which is impossible. I can't conceal a turn while slipping a stitch, which is why I'll be using the stitch before. So that's this stitch to conceal this turn. And again, I will slip knitwise, knit through this loop here and pass that stitch over, and slip the next one. Again, knit and slip, and I am next to another turn which happens to be coinciding with a knit stitch, so no issue there. I can simply slip knitwise, knit through the loop, pass stitch over, and then I am slipping, and I'm supposed to knit again, but then I will arrive at a slip stitch, and because it's impossible to conceal the turn with a slip stitch, I will use the previous stitch again, slipping it knitwise, knitting through the loop here and passing it over. If you need a more in-depth explanation about short rows and Japanese short rows, the pattern has links to specialized videos about that. But here we are applying the same concept on a slip one knit one pattern, which is a little bit more advanced, but it's just this one round and we are doing it together, so you should be okay. Then I am slipping and knitting all the way to the beginning of round, and we should end with a knit stitch. So the first 3 slip stitch columns will align nicely with the existing ones, but because here in this area we increased between the pair of stitches, those columns won't always align so nicely, but that's not a big deal because it also gives a nice edgy detail to the sock. And that's it. We are now done with the short row shaped heel, and heel flap is next. Now the heel flap, we'll also be working it back and forth between these markers, at the same time decreasing all the stitches one stitch per 2 rows until we get to almost the end, and then we'll join back in the round and work the leg. So I am at the beginning of the round, and because we had, if for the short rows we were knitting all stitches and on the wrong side we had that slip stitch pattern, then for the heel flap, because we had a whole round while we were concealing the turns, we have swapped it, and we'll happen to have this slipping pleasure on the right side this time. So I knit one, slip one, knit one, slip one, all the way to the marker, heel flap marker that is. And here we will do an SSK. That is a, I do it slightly differently, but if you do SSK the way you're used to, that is a left leaning decrease, and which will act as a heel flap border on this side. And the wrong side row will be simply slipping the first one with yarn in front, slipping the marker, and purling all the stitches to the other side of the heel flap to the marker B. Now I'm at the beginning of round, so if you have a marker there, you would just simply slip it, and we continue to the other marker, other heel flap marker. And in this case, we'll just simply purl two together. That will be the decrease to do on this side. And we'll create a symmetrical right-leaning line border on this side. And on the right side again, we slip one, knit one, all the way to beginning a round, at which point we have those 2 consecutive knit stitches to remember to do. So the last stitch of the round is a knit stitch, and so is the first one. And once we get here, again, we'll do an SSK, turn the work, no need to work any short row methods here. Turn the work all the way here, and purl 2 together as many times as the pattern states, and we'll have our heel flap. So I have finished the heel flap, and I am ready to return back to work in the round. The leg, which will be exactly the same as the instep part, except there's one round where we need to remove the markers and do the final decreases. So I am knitting all the way, slipping and knitting all the way to the first heel flap marker. And I can now remove it, because this will be the last heel flap decrease I do on this side. And the reason why I will continue to work in the round is so that I do this last decrease approaching from the other side, and that will prevent a hole from forming. Now I have to do the usual chart row, and on the other side of the chart now I knit to 2 stitches before the marker, and I do a knit 2 together instead of a purl 2 together, as I'm working that on the right side. I no longer need this marker, and I can continue knitting all the way to the beginning of round and restart the leg in the exact same way as we worked the instep here. And the pattern does tell you how long you is recommended to work, but of course, as it's a toe-up sock, you can adjust the length to as long as you like, and I'll come back then and show you how to start the ribbing. I worked enough of the leg length to where I'm ready to start the cuff, and it will be a 1x1 twisted rib that will work here, but I would like the knit stitches, the twisted knit stitch columns, to align as much as possible with the slip stitch columns here. And because we had 2 knit stitches in a row, and there are 2 twisted stitch columns here at the other side, at the center of the top, we'll do a quick adjustment round by decreasing 2 stitches so that everything falls in line. And the first adjustment will be knitting 2 together. And when we get to the middle of the what used to be the chart panel, we'll knit 2 together through the back loop to join the 2 twisted stitch columns into one. I won't need this marker anymore. Right, I am almost there. It would be good if they were on the same needle. And I can do a knit 2 together here. Oh, perhaps I should do it with the other needle. And continue all the way to the beginning of round. Now that I'm there, I can set the pattern for the 1x1 twisted rib by knitting 1 through the back loop and purling 1 all the way around. And I'll be repeating these 2 stitches for as long as I need for the cuff, and return back to set up the tubular bind-off. Now I've got my cuff to the length that I like, and I am ready to begin the bind-off. And it's important for a toe-up sock to have a very stretchy bind-off so that you can get your heel through the top here. And a few options exist, and a tubular bind-off is one of my favorite options for that. And it's called a tubular bind-off because at the top here we're creating like a little tube using a double knit setup round, and then we are essentially creating 2 pieces of fabric, but for a very, very short height, just the height of 1 round, so it doesn't really look like double knitting, but essentially that's if we continue the setup rounds for multiple rounds, then we'd end up with 2 pieces of fabric that we could just pull apart. So the knit stitches are forming the front piece, and the purl stitches are forming the inner layer. And then with the tubular bind-off, we use a tapestry needle to join the 2 fabrics back together at the top, mimicking the Kitchener stitch grafting. So the setup round goes as follows. We only work all the knit stitch columns, and we slip the purl stitch columns, and on the second round we will be working the purl stitches and slipping the knit stitches, so that each stitch gets to be worked 1 round, but not at the same time, because we're creating 2 layers. So, and in practice it looks something like that. We knit 1 stitch through the back loop and slip the purl stitch with yarn in front, because we want the strand that comes out of the knit stitch to go directly immediately without into the next knit stitch without having another stitch here showing up in front. Again, slipping the purl stitch with yarn in front, knitting through the back loop, slipping, and we repeat this all the way to the beginning of round. It's going to be a little bit tighter than the rest of the rib, but that's normal. That's what it's supposed to be. And when I've gone all the way around, I'll come back and we'll look at how to do the second setup round. And to get the same effect on the wrong side, we now need to slip the knit stitches, but with the yarn in back, because everything now happens at the back. And purl one, slip the knit stitch with the yarn in back, and purl one. So essentially we're getting the exact same look on the wrong side that we had here, except we're not purling through the back loop, but that for this doesn't really matter. Again, slipping with the yarn in back, purling, and we do this all the way to the beginning of round, and then we'll be ready to work with our tapestry needle and bind the stitches off. I've just completed both setup rounds and I am ready to bind the sock off. So for the tubular bind off after the setup rounds, I will need a length of yarn approximately three times the length I need to bind off. So I'm making a loop to represent one of these lengths and then just measuring 3 times that. That should do. I don't mind adding a bit of extra because there's nothing worse than running out of yarn in the middle of tubular bind-off. Well, of course there are worse things, but we would like to avoid that here. And I will do the first couple of stitches a little differently because we are doing the tubular bind-off in the round. So usually the mantra goes knitwise in, purlwise out, and for the second set of stitches we'll go purlwise in and knitwise out. But because we will have to join this in the round, we do sort of a half of the steps for across the 2 first stitches. So I will just go purlwise in without slipping anything, and knitwise in and out. So that will set this up for me to join in the round easily when I get to the end. Now the actual bind-off steps that we'll be repeating across all of the remaining stitches. You can see this first stitch here is a knit stitch, and it's easy to remember that if the first stitch is a knit stitch, I go in knitwise, and I also have to slip this stitch off. And then to come out, I go into the third stitch, but purlwise. So the opposite of what we just did. And if the first stitch is a purl stitch, then we do the opposite. We go in purlwise, so the direction of the in matches the stitch. Purlwise, but we come out knitwise, and it's a little bit tricky to do, so I'll try and do it slowly. I'm trying to go in knitwise into the second stitch, so I have to get the needle out here in front like that, and then knitwise into just the first leg. And we repeat these 2 steps all the time. There's some hair here. Knitwise in, purlwise out, and purlwise in, slip it off, and knitwise out. and you don't want to pull the thread too hard, and you also don't want it to be too loose, because then it won't look neat and tidy. You want these legs that lie across here as a result of you pulling the yarn to be as long as the actual legs of the stitches that you see. That way it'll be looking just like a seamless finish. If you leave them too loose, there'll be loops poking around, and if you pull the yarn too tight, then it will appear a bit squished and won't be as stretchy either. Again. And the first step is determined by the first stitch you see. So if you do this and you get distracted and you look at your needles and you don't know where you are, see, is the first stitch a purl stitch or a knit stitch? It's a purl stitch, so that means I need to go in first purlwise and then come out knitwise from the third stitch. But if the first stitch is a knit stitch, I go in knitwise and come out purlwise through the third stitch. And I'll do that all the way around and come back when I've gotten to the last. Oh, there's one more trick. When you get to very few stitches, if you're using DPNs, get to few stitches on one needle, it's much smoother and easier if you just transfer all of them on one. Otherwise, the weight of the sock will stretch out that last stitch to the point where you won't be able to get the edge to look nice and smooth. If you're using circular needles with magic loop, the same goes. If you get to here and your loop is there, just pull the cable out and readjust so that you can continue without any of the stitches being too stretched out. And right now, when I'm approaching the last few stitches, the end, I can feel that as I'm working over and binding them off, the last few stitches are getting stretched. So what I'll do is I'll pick up a strand here from the already bound off stitches that I will also need to use to join this bind off in the round, and the same on the other side for the purl stitch. That way I sort of get two things for one. I'm preventing these stitches from stretching out, and I will be able to seamlessly join in the round this bind off in a second. You just have to keep in mind that the last two aren't actually stitches that I need to bind off, but they are just there as the second half of the steps for the last two remaining stitches. So these are the last two remaining stitches. I'm slipping it off and I'm doing the same with that last stitch. And I can just slide the needle out of there because those were not real stitches that I needed to bind off, and it's pretty seamlessly joined in the round. Now I'm just going to weave in the end here and cut the yarn, and we have a finished sock that can go on the blocking phase of this project. I hope you have found this helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.